The scent of old money and decaying dreams hung heavy in the air the day my grandfather died. It wasn't the scent of grief, not really. It was the pungent aroma of greed, and it was about to rip my family, a family I thought I knew, to shreds. I stood there, a silent witness, as the wolves gathered, their eyes glinting with the hunger for what he'd left behind. And let me tell you, what followed was a nightmare so twisted, so full of betrayal, that it still sends shivers down my spine. You won't believe what they did. Subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss a thing. You'll want to stay for this one. My grandfather, Arthur Sterling, was a titan, not just in business but in spirit. His story was the quintessential American dream, meticulously crafted from scratch. He arrived in this country with little more than the clothes on his back and a fierce determination in his heart. Through tireless labor, shrewd decisions, and an unshakable belief in integrity, he built Sterling Manufacturing from a small local workshop into an industrial powerhouse, a household name renowned for its unwavering quality and ethical practices. Grandpa Arthur wasn't just a businessman. He was a community pillar, a philanthropist whose generosity was as legendary as his business acumen, often given quietly, without fanfare. But to me, he was simply Grandpa Arthur. He was the man with hands calloused from years of labor in the factory, yet gentle enough to teach a clumsy kid how to tie a fishing knot, how to carve a wooden bird, or how to fix a stubborn, leaky faucet, always emphasizing the importance of patience and precision. He taught me the true value of a dollar, the weight of a promise, and perhaps most crucially, the quiet strength of doing what's right, even when it's agonizingly difficult and unpopular. He was the one constant, the solid oak tree in a family that I would soon discover was more like a forest of tangled, insecure vines, constantly seeking sunlight and resources, their roots intertwined, but secretly struggling for dominance beneath the surface. He was the kind of man whose presence filled a room, not with noise, but with an almost palpable sense of stability and wisdom. When he spoke, people listened. When he listened, you felt truly seen. Losing him wasn't just losing a grandfather. It was losing the very anchor of our extended family. We were a sprawling family, a constellation of personalities revolving around Grandpa's gravitational pull, each planet orbiting for their own reasons. There was my Uncle Robert, Grandpa's eldest son, the heir apparent in his own mind. He was a man whose ambition was as palpable as the expensive cologne he wore. A shrewd businessman, yes, but one whose eyes always seemed to be calculating angles, seeing people as chess pieces rather than kin. Robert had worked at Sterling Manufacturing his entire adult life, always expecting to inherit the lion's share, constantly reminding everyone of his sacrifices and unwavering loyalty. He was charming on the surface, but underneath there was a cold, pragmatic core that often made me uneasy. He had an air of superiority, a conviction that he alone understood the complexities of the business, a belief that made him dismissive of others' opinions, especially my mother's. Then came Aunt Carol, the middle child. She lived for appearances. Her entire existence a meticulously curated tapestry of charity galas, exclusive club memberships, and designer clothes. Her world was a grand stage, and she was always playing the lead, often at the expense of genuine connection. Carol had married into old money, or what she thought was old money, And when that marriage crumbled, she found herself in a precarious financial situation, constantly scrambling to maintain the facade of wealth she so desperately craved. She saw Grandpa's fortune not as a legacy to uphold, but as a lifeline, a means to regain her social standing and avoid the ultimate humiliation of being perceived as anything less than affluent. Her smiles were always a little too wide, her laughter a little too loud, masking a desperate insecurity. And finally, my mother, Sarah, the youngest. She was a breath of fresh air, a gentle soul who genuinely sought joy in simple pleasures, far removed from the cutthroat world of corporate takeovers and social climbing. My mother had pursued a career in nursing, dedicating her life to helping others, a path that was often subtly and sometimes not so subtly disparaged by her siblings as unambitious. She had always been Grandpa's favorite, perhaps because she was the least interested in his money, the only one who truly saw him, not his fortune, who appreciated his stories, his wisdom, and his quiet companionship. She was the family's moral compass, a beacon of kindness in a family often consumed by its own desires. We also had a motley collection of cousins, aunts, and uncles, each with their own quiet anxieties, their own desperate financial situations lurking beneath the veneer of polite smiles and carefully rehearsed pleasantries, all eyeing Grandpa's considerable wealth with varying degrees of hope and desperation. The stage was set, though we didn't know it, for a drama that would redefine us all, stripping away pretenses and revealing true characters. The day of the will reading felt less like a solemn remembrance of a beloved patriarch and more like a high-stakes corporate board meeting, suffocating in its intensity. Mr. Davies, Grandpa's longtime lawyer, a man whose face was as emotionless as a granite statue, cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles. His office, typically a picture of quiet professionalism, now hummed with an almost electric tension. The air in the opulent wood-paneled study was thick with unspoken anticipation, a silent hum of questions, desperate hopes, and barely concealed avarice. Each rustle of paper, each barely audible creak of a leather chair sounded like a cannon shot in the cavernous silence. We were all there, perched on the edge of our seats, metaphorically and literally. Uncle Robert, his face a meticulously crafted mask of controlled expectation, betraying nothing but a subtle twitch in his jawline, a telltale sign of his inner turmoil. Aunt Carol, clutching her designer handbag as if it contained her last breath, her eyes darting around the room, assessing, calculating, her usual effervescence replaced by a predatory stillness. My mother, looking genuinely heartbroken, oblivious to the storm brewing around her grief pure and untainted by avarice, still processing the raw keen of loss. And me, just an observer, tucked away in a corner, my role seemingly insignificant, yet already feeling the subtle, unsettling shifts in the room's energy, a chilling premonition of the unraveling that was about to begin. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, until Mr. Davies finally began to speak, his voice crisp and clear, cutting through the tension. Mr. Davies began to read. He started with the usual pleasantries, the respectful acknowledgments, the charitable donations to institutions Grandpa had quietly supported for years, the local library, the hospital wing, the historical society. Then came the bequests to longtime employees, loyal individuals who had dedicated their lives to sterling manufacturing, each name a testament to Grandpa's loyalty and appreciation. This was all expected, all part of the dignified process, setting a calm, almost serene tone. But Then came the bombshell. The Sterling Corporation itself, the vast majority of Grandpa's immense fortune, his life's work, was to be divided equally between his 3 children. A collective, almost imperceptible gasp rippled through the room, a shared intake of breath that vibrated with shock and disbelief. Equal shares. This wasn't what anyone had expected, least of all Uncle Robert, who had always operated under the unwavering assumption that he was the rightful, sole heir, destined to take over the reins of the family business and expand it further, alone, without interference. A prominent vein began to throb visibly in his temple, a telltale sign of his simmering fury, barely contained. Aunt Carol, surprisingly, looked a little pale, but then a flicker of undeniable satisfaction crossed her face, a brief, triumphant smirk, quickly masked by a neutral expression. My mother, bless her innocent heart, just looked confused, her eyes still clouded with grief, unable to fully process the seismic shift that had just occurred, the profound implications of this unexpected parody. The room crackled with unspoken questions, with suppressed outrage, with a sudden, dawning realization of what this truly meant for the Sterling legacy. But then came the kicker, the truly devastating blow, the clause that would ignite the ensuing conflagration. Grandpa, in his infinite wisdom, a wisdom that now seemed almost prescient, had attached a crucial, non-negotiable stipulation. The shares of the company, the very core of his wealth, could not be sold for 10 years. 10 long, excruciating years. This meant no immediate liquidation, no quick cash infusions for those desperate to escape debt or maintain appearances, no immediate lavish spending sprees for Aunt Carol, and certainly no immediate hostile takeover bids for Uncle Robert. It meant they would have to work together, to manage the company jointly, to truly collaborate, a concept that seemed utterly alien to their individualistic, competitive natures. A low growl escaped Uncle Robert's lips, quickly stifled. Aunt Carol's face, which had momentarily brightened, now fell, a look of profound disappointment clouding her features. Her plans for a lavish new life, a grand escape from her financial woes, crumbled before her eyes. And then there was another, even more unexpected twist. A substantial trust fund meticulously set up for me, his grandchild, to be released on my 30th birthday. The will explicitly stated it was for my education and future endeavors, to ensure I had the freedom to pursue my own path, unburdened by financial pressures. It was a final act of profound kindness, a thoughtful safety net from a loving grandfather who seemed to understand the precariousness of my position within this avaricious family, a silent testament to his concern for my well-being beyond his lifetime. Little did I know, this trust fund and Grandpa's fervent desire for his children to genuinely collaborate and uphold his legacy for a decade would become the catalysts for a bitter, ugly war, ripping apart the very fabric of our family, exposing the ugly underbelly of ambition, resentment, and secrets that had festered beneath decades of polite smiles and carefully maintained appearances. The silence that followed Mr. Davies' final words was no longer anticipatory. It was heavy with dread, the air crackling with the unspoken resentments that were about to explode. The ink on the will was barely dry, the faint scent of parchment still lingering in the opulent study, when the seemingly subtle cracks in our family facade began to splinter, then shatter with alarming speed. The veneer of mourning dissolved, replaced by a raw, unbridled fury, Uncle Robert, his face a perpetual mask of barely suppressed rage, immediately launched into challenging the will. He stalked out of Mr. Davies' office, slamming the door, and the very next day, a flurry of legal papers arrived. He claimed Grandpa was not of sound mind in his final days, that he had been unduly influenced into creating such an unjust and illogical will, his mind weakened by age and illness. He even subtly hinted at manipulation, his eyes occasionally darting towards my mother with a chilling, unspoken accusation that hung heavy in the air. Robert saw the 10-year clause as a deliberate slight, an attempt to undermine his rightful position as the patriarch in waiting, the one truly capable of leading Sterling manufacturing into the future. He believed he was the only one with the business acumen to truly manage such a vast enterprise. And being forced into a partnership with his siblings, especially his naive sister Sarah, was an intolerable insult. Aunt Carol, surprisingly, quickly joined forces with him, forming an uneasy, temporary alliance born of shared frustration. Her motivations were less about the company itself and more about the perceived insults of not being given her fair share immediately, the absolute frustration of being tied down by a 10-year clause that prevented her from liquidating assets to maintain the extravagant lifestyle she so desperately craved, and which was rapidly slipping away. "What am I supposed to do for 10 years, Arthur?" I once overheard her wailing into the phone to Robert. "Live like a pauper? This is an insult. Your father clearly lost his mind." They wanted the money, and they wanted it now. They were hell-bent on liquidating their shares regardless of the explicit 10-year clause, regardless of Grandpa's clear stated wishes. My mother, innocent and trusting to a fault, found herself caught in the agonizing middle. She genuinely loved her siblings despite their flaws, and she tried desperately to appeal to their sense of family, their shared memories of Grandpa, the love that she believed still existed beneath layers of greed. He wanted us to work together, to honor his legacy, she pleaded, but her words fell on deaf ears. The wolves had tasted blood, and their hunger for immediate wealth had eclipsed any familial bonds, any sense of honor or respect for their father's wishes. The living room, once a place of joyful family gatherings, became a tense, silent arena, punctuated only by their hushed, venomous arguments, escalating to shouting matches that often ended with slammed doors and bitter tears from my mother. The first truly overt act of betrayal, the one that stung my mother deeply, came from Aunt Carol. Desperate for funds to maintain her lavish lifestyle, the one she felt she was absolutely entitled to, she began quietly, systematically selling off family heirlooms. These weren't just random trinkets or forgotten dust collectors. These were pieces that had been in our family for generations. Items that Grandpa had specifically mentioned in his will as having priceless sentimental value, artifacts steeped in family history and memory. There was Grandmother's exquisite antique locket, a cherished gift from Grandpa on their wedding day that Carol claimed was just old metal, a rare collection of first edition books inscribed by famous authors that had lined Grandpa's study walls for decades, suddenly vanished. Even a beloved oil painting, a landscape that had hung in the family dining room for as long as I could remember, depicting the very estate we were fighting over, was quietly put up for auction. Carol justified it with a dismissive wave of her perfectly manicured hand, saying they were just things, dust collectors, or that Grandpa wouldn't mind. But I knew, and my mother knew, that it was a blatant, heartbreaking disregard for Grandpa's memory, a public declaration that money trumped all else, even sentiment, even legacy. It was the first time I saw the cold, calculating side of her, a side that put material gain above any emotional connection or family legacy. My mother, heartbroken and infuriated by this desecration of Grandpa's wishes and family history, tried to confront her, to appeal to her conscience, to her heart.
"How could you, Carol? These were Papa's," my mother cried one afternoon, holding a tear-stained auction catalog. But Aunt Carol just brushed her off with the flick of her wrist, her voice laced with disdain, accusing my mother of being sentimental and naive, stuck in the past, and even jealous of her initiative. The chasm between them grew wider with each missing family treasure, each sold piece of our shared past.
But Uncle Robert's betrayal was far more insidious, a slow poison designed to dismantle everything Grandpa had built. He began actively sabotaging the company from within, a calculated, ruthless move to devalue sterling manufacturing and force his sister's hands. He started making wildly questionable business decisions, cutting corners on quality that Grandpa would have been appalled by, jeopardizing the very reputation Sterling had built. He alienated long-time, loyal clients with aggressive, unethical tactics, driving them into the arms of competitors. His goal was simple: to drive the company's value down, to create such a desperate crisis that it would compel my mother and Aunt Carol to sell their shares to him at a rock-bottom price, allowing him to gain full, undisputed control for a fraction of its true worth. He saw it as a hostile takeover from within, a brilliant chess move. He even went as far as to try and cut off my mother's access to company funds, claiming she was mismanaging her inheritance, draining company resources with her inexperience. In reality, she was the only one desperately trying to keep the company afloat according to Grandpa's original vision, trying to preserve its integrity and maintain the ethical standards that had made it great. She was forced to hire her own legal counsel just to access the funds Grandpa had clearly designated for her, simply to continue operations. The atmosphere at family gatherings, which had always been a source of uneasy tension, became utterly poisonous. Dinners were no longer shared meals, but tense battlegrounds, polite smiles masking simmering resentment, accusations hanging heavy in the air, each word a venomous dart aimed at the heart of the family. The whispers grew louder, the accusations sharper, the divide becoming an unbridgeable canyon. My mother, strong as she was visibly crumbling under the relentless pressure, her spirit dimming with each new act of treachery and calculated cruelty. She would often retreat to her room, crying silently, wishing Grandpa was still there to make sense of the chaos. Then, one quiet evening, the phone rang. It was my mother, her voice trembling, almost inaudible, with a mixture of shock, profound sadness, and a hint of something else, something I couldn't quite place, perhaps a dawning realization. She had been going through Grandpa's personal effects, a task she had been putting off for months, still too raw from his passing, too overwhelmed by the ongoing family strife. She had finally gathered the courage to sort through his old study, a room that had always felt like his sanctuary. Tucked away behind a loose floorboard near his favorite armchair, a place he always said held his deepest secrets, she found a small, dusty wooden box. It wasn't locked, but it felt sacred, untouched for decades. Inside were old, yellowed letters tied neatly with a faded silk ribbon. They were letters from a woman named Eleanor, dating back decades, long before Grandpa met our grandmother, long before sterling manufacturing was the empire it became. And as my mother read, tears streaming down her face, a heartbreaking truth unfolded, a truth that ripped through the very fabric of our family history. Grandpa had had a secret second family, a son, a boy named David, born years before he married our grandmother, a son he had secretly supported his entire life, ensuring he was cared for, educated, loved, but kept hidden from the rest of us. The letters detailed a complex, clandestine relationship, a love story kept separate, a life lived in parallel. He had never told anyone, not a single soul in our immediate family. This illegitimate son, this phantom sibling, this ghost from the past, was mentioned not only in the letters but also in a separate sealed codicil to the will, left to be opened only if the initial terms of the will were contested.
Grandpa, it seemed, with a foresight that was both chilling and brilliantly strategic, had anticipated their greed. He had left a failsafe, a final, devastating card to play from beyond the grave, a testament to his understanding of human nature, even the darker aspects of his own children. The revelation hit Uncle Robert and Aunt Carol like a bombshell, shattering their carefully constructed world of entitlement and exposing the true genius of Grandpa's foresight. My mother, distraught but resolute, her voice surprisingly strong despite her profound pain, confronted them with the codicil. She called an emergency family meeting, insisting Mr. Davies be present. Their initial reaction was a chaotic mix of disbelief, then outright outrage. "This is a forgery!" Uncle Robert roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "Sarah, what kind of elaborate scheme are you concocting now to steal more for yourself?" Aunt Carol shrieked, her usual composure completely gone, her accusations spitting venom. But Mr. Davies, Grandpa's secret son, was to inherit a significant portion of the Sterling Corporation, even a larger share than what was initially outlined for my mother, if the original terms of the will were not upheld within a year of Grandpa's passing. In essence, Grandpa had created the ultimate deterrent, a hidden guardian for his legacy. He had known his children too well, their individual weaknesses, their collective avarice. He had known their greed would eventually lead them to try and dismantle his carefully planned wishes, to exploit loopholes, to tear apart the company he had built. And he had prepared for it, brilliantly and tragically, knowing this secret would be the only thing powerful enough to make them back down. The very thought of a stranger, an illegitimate son, inheriting a part of their empire was more than they could bear, a humiliation far worse than sharing equally. The blood drained from Uncle Robert's face as he finally comprehended the magnitude of Grandpa's final, calculated move. Aunt Carol sank into a chair, speechless, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. The news of David and the terrifying implications of the codicil sent Uncle Robert and Aunt Carol into an absolute frenzy, but a different kind of frenzy, one of desperate, panicked scrambling. The furious energy that had fueled their challenges and legal maneuvers evaporated, replaced by a sudden, chilling realization of the true cost of their avarice. They immediately and quite dramatically dropped their challenge to the original will, recalling their lawyers, issuing public retractions, and making awkward, hurried attempts at reconciliation with my mother. They realized that continuing to fight it, pushing for liquidations or greater shares would only result in a larger slice of the pie going to someone they considered an unwelcome outsider, a complete stranger, a stark reminder of Grandpa's hidden past. They were forced to reconcile, to some extent, with the 10-year clause and the equal division of the company. A bitter, bitter pill to swallow for both of them. The very thing they had fought against with such venom and determination, they now had to uphold, all because of Grandpa's brilliant, heartbreaking secret. The intense court battles which had consumed our lives for months, draining our resources and our emotional reserves, slowly simmered down. They were replaced by a tense, fragile peace, an uneasy truce born not of genuine reconciliation or a newfound respect, but of mutual fear and self-preservation. They hated David even before they met him, but they hated the thought of losing their money or sharing it with an unknown entity even more. Robert returned to the company, begrudgingly working alongside my mother on operational decisions, his resentments barely concealed. Carol, for her part, stopped selling heirlooms and tried to manage her remaining finances with a newfound, albeit painful, austerity. My mother, though still grieving the profound loss of her father and the shattering of her family's once pristine image, found a strange, unexpected sense of peace amidst the forced calm. She had honored Grandpa's wishes, not out of greed or desire for more, but out of pure love and unwavering respect for the man he was, for the legacy he intended. She had stood strong, a quiet force against the relentless tide of her siblings' avarice and manipulation, emerging from the fire with her integrity intact. And as for me, my trust fund, once a distant promise, became less about financial security and more about a profound, humbling understanding of my grandfather's complex wisdom and his ultimate act of protection. He had not only left me money, but he had also left me a powerful, unforgettable lesson that even in death, some secrets can serve to protect the living, to reveal hidden truths, and that some legacies, built on integrity, foresight, and even painful hidden sacrifices, are far more enduring and valuable than mere wealth. The discovery of David was a painful wound, but it was also a cleansing fire, burning away the illusions we held about our family and about Grandpa.
The family, as I had known it for my entire life, was irrevocably changed. The bonds of blood, once presumed to be unbreakable, had been stretched and torn, scarred by resentment, suspicion, and undeniable betrayal. Yet, surprisingly, they were not completely broken. Uncle Robert and Aunt Carol, though still seething with resentment and a deep-seated distrust of each other, were forced to work together on the company, albeit with perpetually gritted teeth and strained smiles for public appearances. They learned, slowly and painfully, that collective effort, even begrudgingly given, was ultimately more profitable and less stressful than destructive ambition. The ghost of David, the secret son, hung over them, a constant, unspoken reminder of the consequences of their unchecked greed, a silent guarantor of the uneasy peace. My mother and I, however, emerged from the ashes of this family war with a stronger, unbreakable bond, forged in the crucible of adversity. We had a deeper understanding of integrity, resilience, and a profound respect for the complex, often hidden depths of our family history. And sometimes, just sometimes, the true fortune lies not in the inheritance itself, but in the understanding gained, the strength discovered, and the resilience built through the dramatic, heartbreaking battles fought over it. What a journey, right? It just goes to show you. Sometimes the biggest battles are fought not on a grand battlefield, but within the seemingly safe walls of your own home, over something as simple or as complex as an inheritance. Have you ever experienced a family betrayal like this? Or perhaps you've seen the true colors of people emerge when immense money is on the line. Share your stories in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story grabbed you, like this video and subscribe for more jaw-dropping family dramas. You won't want to miss what's coming next.